Good morning. Well, that is really what the author of Hebrews, the preacher of Hebrews, has been trying to do. He's been trying to take a group of people who have been discouraged, a group of people who have been, they've been standing on the edge of a cliff, feeling like they will just fall off into the abyss. And he has pointed them towards Jesus. He has pointed them towards the one who is above all. The one, as he opens his message, his letter, he points them towards how great and how amazing, how awesome Jesus is. And that is what he has been trying to do. And as he introduces or reintroduces, reminds them of who he is, he reminds them then of what he has done. He reminds them of not just how great he is, but the great things that he has done. And of course, all of that culminates in Easter. That we celebrated just a few weeks ago. It culminates in the sacrifice, in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And as he has done that, his sole purpose, his sole goal along the way has been to reach out and to grab hold of those who would be on the edge of that cliff and pull them back. His goal is to encourage. This whole message, this whole letter of Hebrews really is, I think we might have mentioned at the very beginning of this, the New Testament's answer to encouragement. And it's no mistake that in order to encourage, or the greatest way to encourage, is to point people to Jesus. Is to get a fresh glimpse, to get, to be reminded of just who he is and the great things that he has done. And of course, along the way, he has held out these great truths in front of us, has he not? These amazing things that it would take us weeks and months and years really to dive into the depths of the meaning that he would lay out in front of us. And as he has done so, he has progressively gotten closer and closer to, all right, here's these great truths, now live them out in your lives. And that's what he's telling them. If you want to come back from the edge of that cliff, if you want to live a life that is filled with the courage that we see that he points towards, then you need to be reminded of these things. You need to live these things out in your daily lives. And so he comes to a point in his message where he is helping them understand, what does this look like practically? In a real, practical, genuine way, how does this live itself out? And as we began to walk through the great chapter 11 of Hebrews, we saw a glimpse of that last week, as he points us towards a few of those who lived in this manner, who lived lives of faith, who lived lives that, remember we mentioned, that caught the eye of the Lord. And that's where we pick up in the middle of that here this morning in chapter 11 in verse 17. It says this, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, 'In Isaac your seed shall be called,' concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instruction concerning his bones." If you have ever wondered whether you can trust God in the middle of your circumstances, if you have ever wondered whether you can trust God in the middle of the challenging stuff, the challenging circumstances of your life, then really you don't have to go any further than Abraham, than the one that he would hold out right in front of us at the beginning of this section. I mean, we're reminded of that, aren't we, of what happened? You know, this really is one of the most difficult passages to preach. The reason is not because it's hard, not because it's difficult, but because there's so much in here. He goes from one verse to another, to another, to another, and he jumps from one great instance to another, one great, one who walked by faith to another. And we could spend all morning just diving into any one of these. But here he points us to Abraham. Now remember, he's writing this not only to a group of believers who are on the edge, not only to a group of believers who are discouraged, but he's writing this to a group of Hebrew believers. And so when he, just mentions the name Abraham, they would have instantly recalled all of his life and all, that he had been through, all that God had called him to, all that God did in his life. Because they knew this. They knew this since childhood. They would have been taught this. Many of them could recite, much of Abraham's life just by memory. They could just tell you the story of what had happened. But here he makes reference to the time in his life when God tested him, when God said, "Take your son Isaac, the one who I promised to you, who would essentially become as vast as the sand is on the seashore. Take him and offer him to me as a sacrifice." And yet in the midst of his struggle, Abraham obeyed. Abraham went. He took his son, this son that God had promised to him, up on the side of a mountain with the intention of sacrificing him to God as he was instructed. And you can imagine along the way how that conversation went. Isaac by this time was, probably in his early teenage years. And we're told, if you go back to the account in Genesis, that Isaac asked him along the way, something like, "Dad, where's the sacrifice?" Now, that tells us a couple of things. It tells us that among, even though Isaac had his own challenges and didn't always, wasn't perfect in his walk with God, he had taught his son well. And he knew that what he was doing, he knew that where he was going was to go and to make a sacrifice to God. And what did Abraham tell him? All he said to him is that God will provide. I mean, you want to talk about a heart-wrenching step of faith. Something that, none of us in this room can really wrap our heads around. We can't wrap our hearts around what Abraham must have been going through. And the author of Hebrews gives us a little bit of a glimpse into the heart of Abraham, into his mind as he processed through this. I guess I guess he could always just raise him from the dead. That's how he is processing this. That tells us that he had every intention of following through on what God had commanded him to do. Why do we look at this? Why does the author of Hebrews remind us of this? Why does he, and this is just kind of right in the middle of all of these examples that he is giving to us, why does he do this? It's because he knows that remembering the faith of others can strengthen our own walk of faith. Is that not true? Remembering how God provided, remembering how God showed up, if you will, in the lives of others can encourage us. And so here we see Abraham went in spite of this, in spite of the challenge, in spite of the heart-wrenching process. He obeyed. And because he did, we can be encouraged that the God that we serve, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God who made these promises to Abraham, he keeps his promises. He is a God who keeps his promises. That's what we learn from this account. If you've ever wondered whether you can trust God with your future, then all you need to do is look at Abraham's son Isaac. All you need to do is look at how God worked in his life with all that he had gone through, including this time when he would have remembered walking with his father on the way up to on the side of that mountain. He would have remembered that. And I bet, Genesis doesn't tell us, the account doesn't tell us how he explained things to his son, but we know that Isaac was laid out there on the altar, and Abraham stood there with a knife ready to make the sacrifice when God stopped him. You can bet that made an impression on Isaac, don't you think? I mean, with all that he saw, one of the things that is clear that Isaac learned was that his future was in God's hands. You see, remembering the faith of others and watching how God worked in their lives can strengthen our own faith as well. Just as in the same way, remembering our own history, remembering what God has done in our lives can strengthen our faith and the faith of others at the same time. If you have ever wondered whether you can trust God to the very end of your life, well, then you really don't have to go any further than the next example that we're given, and that of Jacob. Now, Jacob, if you know anything about him at all, and anything about the account in Genesis of Abraham and some of the things that he did, I mean, he had his challenges, right? He was not a perfect guy. And yet, as he came to the end of his life, don't you think it's interesting that it is worship that the author of Hebrews mentions? It is worship that is on his lips. As he leans on his staff, as he considers, remember, what did he say here? By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. I mean, you get the picture that as he's got some of his family around him, as he blesses Joseph and his sons, that he worships God as he remembers what he has done and how far he has brought him. You see, remembering the faith of others, remembering how God had carried them along, remembering how far God had brought them can strengthen our own faith. And I wonder sometimes, will we have the kind of perspective that when we get close to the end of our days here, on earth, will we worship God as Jacob did? Now, there's a lot about Jacob's life that I wouldn't recommend that we copy or emulate. But this is worth striving towards. I mean, think about it. All that he saw God do. I mean, I think it just highlights the grace of God. When you look back on a life that stumbled as Jacob did from time to time. In fact, he limped, quite a ways, quite a lot of his life just because of the fact that he, wrestled with God, right? And so I wonder if that might be something that we would look forward to in our lives. Have you ever wondered whether you can trust God to keep his promises? I mean, we read stuff in Scripture, right? We read promises. Sometimes we pull them out of their context, and sometimes we try and apply promises to us that weren't intended for us. But there's a lot of promises in the midst of God's Word. There's a lot of promises that he makes to us specifically, to believers, post-Easter, those of us on this side of the resurrection. And have you ever wondered, can we trust God to keep his promises? Well, all we have to do is to look at the next one, and that is Joseph. I mean, you remember some of what happened in Joseph's life? Joseph, a couple of times saw in a dream, when he was still young, that God laid out in front of him, he saw the places that he would take him. He saw the heights to which God would take him. He saw the position that he would hold. And yet, where did Joseph end up? Does anybody remember, some of those accounts? Where did he end up? He ended up in slavery, yeah. He ended up as a slave. I mean, he didn't just end up as a slave. He was sold as a slave by his brothers. I mean, that looks like, he's going to, rule over, his family, doesn't it? I mean, where did he end up from there? I mean, he ended up in prison, right? Because he was wrongfully accused of something. And yet, at his dying request, he demonstrates his faith. He says his request was that when you leave this place, when you leave Egypt, take my bones with you and bury them with my people. You see, he didn't say to Joseph's sons, he didn't tell them, if God ever lets you out of here. He doesn't say, if Egypt ever lets you go. He says, when you go, take my bones with you. You see, he can be trusted. He can be trusted with our future. Why? Because we know that he took care of those like Joseph. You see, remembering the faith of others strengthens our own faith. But I want us to keep in mind, though, that it was in the midst of the difficulties and the challenges of life that Joseph's faith grew. Right? It was because he was sold into slavery. It was because, he was wrongfully accused and ended up in prison. It was because of all of those circumstances. It was through all of those circumstances that he learned faith. That he learned that his God could be trusted. I mean, is that not true of us as well? That it's through the challenges, it's through, the hardships, the heartaches, the stuff of life. That's where we learn to lean upon God. Well, let's go on and read another chunk of this. In verse 23, it says this: by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the approach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry ground, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. If you have ever wondered whether you can trust God with your children, then you really don't have to look any further than Moses' parents, right? I mean, with Pharaoh, killing baby boys, they risked everything by saving Moses. They shielded him to start with. They hid him away to start with. I don't think he was the same temperament as some of our little people. I don't know how you'd hide some of them. Some of them have lungs, but one of them lives in my basement. I mean, she's got lungs. Anyways, but as something that only God can do, They took this little one, put him in a basket, and set him in the Nile River. And as only God can, it was Pharaoh's daughter who found him. Let me be clear. When the little one with lungs is yelling, she's saying, "Grandpa." I'm just telling you. But remembering the faith of others can strengthen our own faith. I'll let you know how my kids turn out, but we'll see. But I wonder what went through their minds as they set this child in the Nile River. I mean, can you imagine? And yet, it was by faith they believed that God had a plan. Because ultimately, they put him not in the Nile River, but in the hands of God. If you ever wondered whether you can trust God, not just with your future, but with your identity, then you really don't have to go any further than Moses himself. I mean, not only did God preserve him at the very beginning, I mean, everybody, it seemed, had a plan for Moses, right? Moses had a plan for Moses. Egypt had a plan for Moses. And even the people of Israel had a plan for Moses. I'm sure his parents had a plan for him as well. But ultimately, God had very different plans for Moses. And you see, when he was trying to figure out, when he had before him his plans, well, remember what happened? Remember what happened when God come along and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I have a plan for you"? Remember the whole burning bush scene and what happened when God came and spoke to Moses? what was his response? Absolutely, sign me up. No. He said, I don't want any part of this. He said, I can't talk. He said, I don't want to stand in front of people. I want nothing to do with this. He had become pretty content, living on the backside of the desert away from people. But God had a different plan. I mean, I get it. I understand Moses, I think, at this point in his life better than anything. Nothing is more peaceful than sitting behind the wheel of a truck with nobody else around. You don't have to deal with nothing. Is that not true? You're just quiet, usually. And I remember when God tapped me on the shoulder, and he says, I've got plans for you. And I said, I'm not interested. I don't want to talk in front of people. I don't want to stand in front of people. Besides that, who's going to listen to me anyway? Well, I'm here. God won, obviously, right? But here's the encouragement. You see, when we look at the faith of others, we can see, if God can take somebody like Moses, and Moses wasn't perfect either. This is the problem with this passage. Because you can't, once you start kind of scratching, you just keep going, right? And you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But Moses wasn't perfect. And yet God used him to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt. I mean, if that's not an encouragement that if he can do that with Moses, he can do anything with any one of us. If you have ever wondered whether you can trust God even with your life itself, then you don't have to go any further than really the last verse of that. It says, by faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry ground, whereas the Egyptians, when attempting to do so, were drowned. Remember what happened? I mean, God did some amazing things as they left Egypt, and we could spend months and months unpacking all of that. But you remember what happened when Moses stretched out his staff over the Red Sea, it parted, and they walked across on dry ground? And you remember what happened when they looked back and the army started to pursue them? People start to panic just a little bit. Isn't that what we do, right? I mean, God has just opened up the Red Sea and they panic because some people are coming after them. You see how crazy that sounds? But what happens? Do you remember what happens? I mean, as soon as the people of Israel step out of the seabed, in comes the water, and the Egyptian army is gone. He can be trusted. I mean, but I want to make sure we understand, as I've mentioned before, we live in a fallen world. That means that sickness and death follow all of us. But when God has a plan, there is no power on earth or anywhere else, for that matter, that can stop it. Do you believe that? I do, down to the very core of who I am. I remember, when I finally gave into that tap on my shoulder, when God said, "All right, I've got something else for you to do." I spent one more winter. It was in the middle of the winter, hauling logs in the mountains in British Columbia. And I'll tell you what, I had more fun that year than at any other time in my life. You know why? Because I knew what God had called me to. I knew by that time I'd accepted where God had called me. And so I drove faster, I worked longer. I mean, I just had a blast. I mean, it's a dangerous occupation, if you didn't know that. So my wife one day says to me, as I was conveying some of this to her, she said, "Yes, but he never said you would go in a wheelchair." So I slowed down. Remembering the faith of others can strengthen our own faith. If God can deliver his people out of the most powerful nation on earth at the time, then don't you think he's capable of leading each and every one of us wherever he wants us to go? I mean, don't you think that the same God who can part a sea and have people walk across it, don't you think he is able to provide for whatever and wherever he might take us? And yet, how often do we struggle with that? How often do we question that? You see, that's why we do these things. That's why the author of Hebrews lays this out for this group of people who are discouraged. They needed to be reminded of those who had gone before, needed to be reminded of the character of the God that they served. You see, He can take us wherever He would point us. And I could tell you story after story after story how God has provided for us ever since that day when we said we would go. Let me read a little more of this, or we're going to run out of time. By faith. You caught that, right? I mean, he kind of repeats himself a little bit. By faith, by faith, by faith. He's highlighting the fact that the reason they were able to do these things, the reason they saw these things, is because they walked by faith. He's telling us, showing us, this is what faith looks like. By faith, he said, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall we say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, of Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness they were made strong. They became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, were slain by the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Have you ever, that's quite a list, isn't it? Have you ever wondered whether you can trust God's plans? Then you don't have to look any further than Joshua. And that first encounter that he lists there. Remember when they went into the promised land, and the first city they come to is this city called Jericho. It was the most fortified city around. What a cool story that whole, there's so many cool things about Joshua, and as they begin to go into the promised land. But what a great reminder for us. Never mind all the detail of it. Never mind, all the other cool stuff around it. That account, it really is, it's to highlight the fact that it's all about Him and not about us. Do we get that? It wasn't about their military might. It wasn't about, their ability. It wasn't about anything. If they were to take the promised land, it was going to be God and God alone who accomplished it. I remember the first service that we had. We were moving from our living room into a gymnasium as we were planting a church in Canada. We had lots of big plans. I had lots of big plans. That might be hard for you to understand, but I lots of things going through my head, things that we were going to do, places that we were going to go, people that we were going to reach. And as we were getting ready for this first service in this gymnasium was a big step for us. I remember this young woman walked in. She walked in before the service. I didn't meet her. I didn't talk to her. She went up to one of the young ladies who was there. She didn't hear me preach. She didn't sit through one of our services. She didn't do any of the things she was supposed to do. But she left that morning a saved individual because of what God did. Do we understand the implications of that? You see, as we started out, that whole situation wasn't for any other reason than me. It was God reminding me at the beginning of this that whatever happened, whatever we would see, it would be Him and Him alone who did it. Not our plans, not what we wanted to do. You see, this might be a surprise to some of us, but He really doesn't need us. We get to be a part of the process. We get to see what He does if we will let Him use us. You see, remembering the faith of others strengthens our own. And if God can tear down the walls of Jericho, is there any obstacle that's too big that He can't take care of? I mean, is there any obstacle really that could be out in front of us individually or even, as a church that's too big that He can't take us through? Well, let's go on. If you have ever wondered whether you can trust God with a major change in your life, you don't have to look any further than this woman named Rahab. I mean, from prostitute to the lineage of Jesus. I mean, that's a little bit of a change, don't you think? I mean, we don't need to say anymore. Remembering the faith of others, remembering what God did in the lives of others can strengthen our own faith. And really, I mean, if God can do such a thing with someone like her. See, that's Grandpa. I heard that. I don't know if you guys heard that. But here's the point. What can He not do with us? How often, though, do we cower, in a corner, or we just, we sit with our head in our hands and we say, poor me, I can't do anything. God can't do anything with me. I'm useless. Whatever you want to say. And yet God can take someone like her and use her to such an extent. I'll tell you, you are not broken enough. You are not sidelined enough. You are not dirty enough that God can't take you and use you. That's worth the price of admission, isn't it? Isn't that cool? If you've ever wondered whether you can trust God, when you're facing extraordinary odds, then you don't have to go any further than Gideon. I mean, we can't even get into Gideon. I mean, if you ever wondered whether you can trust God with a legacy that you want to leave behind. Remember last week we talked about legacy, we talked about heritage. If you've ever wondered whether you can trust God with your strength to give you enough strength. If you ever wonder if you can trust God even with your livelihood. If you ever wonder if you could trust God with even the very words that come out of your mouth, then you don't have to go any further than the dozens upon dozens upon dozens of examples that we have in our Bibles of people that God did exactly those things for. And He lists for us just a few. Why does He do this? You see, remembering the faith of others strengthens our own faith. Abraham trusted God. It tells us we can trust God no matter what. Isaac trusted God with his future. Jacob trusted God to such an extent that he worshiped Him in his last days. Joseph trusted God that he would keep His promises, even though he didn't see them. She's saying, amen. I heard that. See, if you ever, I don't know about you, but I've read the rest of this book. And it's not all roses and sunshine. It tells us that there will come a point in time where increasingly those who claim the name of Jesus will be persecuted. It tells us that there will come a time when we will face suffering. I know we don't like that. I know we like to ignore that, but it's there. And if you have ever read the rest of this book, I mean, of course, we know that we win, right? I mean, I'm good with that. But have you ever wondered whether God can be trusted in the intern? whether God can be trusted even if you were to face horrific persecution, then you really don't have to look any further than the list that he gives us, or even the men and women who fill the history of Christianity. You see, remembering the faith of others strengthens our own faith. And on and on and on we could go. I mean, you get the sense as the author is doing this, as he is laying this out, this message for them, he gets more and more excited. And he gets to the point where he just kind of throws his hands up in the air, and there's just too many to talk about. Because God has done so much. You see, faith, he could have boiled it all down and just said, faith is practical belief. It's living out what you believe. It's living like you believe God is real. Like Jesus is as great as he said he is. That he has accomplished the things that he said has been accomplished. And it's living like it. Living like we believe God. That's all these people did. You see, it's what he's trying to encourage these believers who are standing on the edge of the cliff. They're threatening to kind of walk away from their faith. He's encouraging them to live like the one that they serve really is great. To live like the one that they are serving really did die on a cross for their sin. Really was the ultimate sacrifice that fulfilled all of the sacrificial system. That he really did willingly give himself as that sacrifice. And knowing all that he is, knowing all that he has done, it is living like he can be trusted. This is the one who holds the world by the power of his word. But I know for most of us, we don't think in those terms, do we? It's not persecution. It's not imprisonment. It's not outnumbered battles that we see. It's not, holding or leading a kingdom. It's not even the fate of the people who would follow us. For most of us, don't we just want to know that God can be trusted in the day-to-day stuff of life? We get so overwhelmed and so fixated on little things that we don't realize, we don't stop to remember the great things that he has already done. To a group of people who were discouraged with life's challenges, to a group of people who were standing on the edge of a cliff, to them the author first reminds them of the greatness of Jesus. He then reminds them of what this great Jesus has done. And now he points them towards the faith of others and how they stood tall in the face of all that life could throw at them. You see, remembering the faith of others can not only strengthen our faith, but it reminds us of the things that God has done in our lives as well. Does it not? I could not have sat back a year ago and planned this out better. Because this afternoon at 5:30, we're going to gather again. We're going to have dinner downstairs together. We're going to come upstairs, and we're going to have one of our 2 meetings a year. And the focus of our meeting this afternoon is celebrating what God has done. We couldn't have planned this out to line up with Hebrews any better than this. Because that's the essence of what he's telling us to do. To hold out in front of one another the things that God has done. Remember. The Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians about the armor of God. You guys familiar with that? Let me rain a little bit on your parade. Because most of us read that out of its context. Most of us do not read it as it was intended to be read. Because it was not a letter written to you individually. It was a letter written to the church at Ephesus. It is corporate in nature. It is written not to individuals, but to a group of believers gathered together. And to them, he tells them this. He tells them that above all, he says, take the shield of faith with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. You hear that? He says, above all other things, the most important thing of all, when he talks about the shield of faith, is well, he tells them that to hold up this shield as a guard, as a defense against anything and everything that the enemy will throw against you. How do you do that? Why is that important? Well, it's important for a few reasons, because first of all, this shield of faith is, again, wielded corporately. That means we remind one another of the things that God has done. We encourage one another with the things that God has done. We pick one another up. You know, when we get to the edge of a cliff, we help one another back. How do we do that? By reminding one another of who He is, what He has done, and how we've seen Him move in our own lives. You see how these things all tie together? See, it's this shield of faith, essentially, that the author of Hebrews is seeking to help this group of believers, to encourage them, to strengthen them. You see, it's this shield of faith. It's remembering and being reminded of the things that God has done that will stop those voices in your head, you know, that are telling you, that are pushing you, you know, over that cliff. You know, those voices that tell you you can't do this on your own. Those voices that whisper into your ear and they tell you to worry about stuff. Tell you to fret about stuff. Tell you to stew about stuff. Tell you to fixate on stuff that really doesn't matter. And they plant seeds of doubt. You guys had any of these things happen to you? You know, whispering in your ear, you know, can God really be trusted? But it's faith, this very thing that the author speaks about, that he's been pointing us towards. It's faith based on the truth of who Jesus is and what He has done that will silence those voices, that will put them away and pull us back from the edge of the cliff. You see, together we can remember those things. Not only the faith of others, but our own faith as well. And that's why we'll take a little bit of time and talk about some of those things a little later today. Because if God was trustworthy then, He can be trustworthy tomorrow. And so in those days when you wonder whether God can be trusted in the middle of your challenges, in the middle of your circumstances, when you find yourself at the edge of a cliff, you don't have to look any further than our own church. Because we've seen God do so many things. You see, if we look at the faith of others, and if we look at the activity of God in our own lives, that's what will give us the strength and the courage to continue on. And so what do we do with all this? What's the point of all of this? Well, let me just encourage you, before you leave here this morning, I know it happens, right? We walk out of these doors and we get immersed in the busyness of life, and all kinds of things come at us, and we have all this list of things to do, and we start to get wrapped back up in the chaos. Can we take a minute and just pause and just reflect and remember the great and mighty things that our God has done? How He has provided in the past. How He has taken care of you in the past. How He reached down and saved you when you didn't deserve it. And how He's got a plan for us that surpasses anything that we could ever even imagine. And all we need to do to please Him, what does Hebrews say? Is to walk by faith. It's just to believe what we know to be true about Him and live like it. Live like we believe Him. Wow, the things that he would do with us if we, those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus Christ, if we would just live like we believe this stuff. It would be our names written on a list such as we have been reading. And it would be us standing, telling of all the great things that he has done in our lives. So I don't know what has brought you to the edge of a cliff in your life. But don't leave here still standing there. Let the faith of others encourage you. Let the faith of those around you pull you back. And so as we have kind of gotten into the habit of doing here at Waypoint, if you need to just take a moment and you come and pray, you do that. If you need others to come around you and pray, then you just stay where you are and somebody will find you. But if you need encouragement, you need to be reminded of the things that God has been doing in our midst,